A dirty kid walked into the most exclusive bank in the city. His voice trembled as he whispered, "I just want to check my balance." The millionaire banker threw his head back and laughed, loud, mocking laughter that bounced off marble walls and crystal chandeliers. But when the computer screen flickered to life, his smile died, froze, shattered, because the number staring back at him made absolutely no sense. Before we go deeper into this story, take a second and hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and let us know where you're watching from. I'm curious to know how far these stories travel. The morning sun burnt gold across Manhattan's financial district, casting long shadows through glass towers that pierced the sky. At 12 years old, Marcus Chen had learnt the hard truth about this city. There were two kinds of people here: those who belonged inside buildings like these, and those who scrubbed the floors after everyone else went home. His mother had been one of the invisible ones. Today, for the first time in his short life, Marcus was about to cross that line. His sneakers, 2 sizes too big held together with silver duct tape, squeaked against polished marble as he pushed through the heavy revolving doors of Blackwell and Associates Private Banking. The air conditioning hit him like a wall of ice, so different from the humid August heat outside, where he'd spent 3 hours pacing the sidewalk, working up the courage to enter. The lobby stole his breath. Marble columns rose 30 feet high, supporting a ceiling decorated with what had to be real gold leaf. Crystal chandeliers, each one probably worth more than every apartment in his building combined, cast warm light over leather furniture that looked too perfect to actually sit on. Everything smelt expensive: fresh flowers, polished wood, and something else he couldn't name. Maybe it was the scent of money itself, of success, of belonging, things Marcus had never known. He clutched the worn envelope in his pocket, feeling the sharp edge of the bank card inside. His fingers were dirty. There'd been no running water in his building for 3 days, and he was painfully aware of the smudge of dirt on his face that he'd tried to wash off at a public fountain that morning. The attempt had only smeared it worse. "May I help you?" The voice came from a woman behind a sleek reception desk. She looked at him the way people in this part of the city always looked at him, like something unpleasant had wandered in from the street, like he didn't belong, like he was a problem that needed solving. Marcus's voice came out as a whisper. He cleared his throat, forced himself to try again. "I need to check my balance." The woman's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose slightly. "I'm sorry, young man, but this is a private banking institution. Perhaps you're looking for the branch bank down on—" "I have an account here." The words tumbled out, desperate and too loud. "Have a card." He pulled the envelope from his pocket with trembling hands, extracting the black card that had arrived in his mailbox 6 months ago. He'd been too afraid to use it until now. Too afraid it might be some kind of mistake. Too afraid that trying to use it would get him in trouble, land him in a place worse than where he already was. But yesterday, when Mrs. Chen from the corner store told him she couldn't give him any more food on credit, when she'd looked at him with those sad, apologetic eyes, he'd realized he had no choice. Emma needed to eat. And Marcus needed to know if this card was real or just another cruel joke from a universe that seemed determined to crush them. The receptionist's expression shifted from disdain to confusion as she looked at the card. It was clearly from this bank. The logo matched. The weight felt right. But she was struggling to reconcile how a kid who looked like he'd been sleeping under a bridge could possibly have an account at one of the most exclusive banks in New York City. "I see," she said slowly, her tone suggesting she saw nothing at all. "Well, you'll need to speak with one of our account managers. If you'll just wait over there." She gestured toward a seating area, but Marcus barely heard her. His attention had been captured by the man striding across the lobby like he owned the entire world. which, according to the nameplate on the massive mahogany desk he was approaching, he basically did. Richard Blackwell. Even Marcus, who knew nothing about banking or wealth or any of this world, had heard of Richard Blackwell. His face was on billboards across the city, always with that same confident smile that said he'd never known a moment of doubt or hardship in his entire life. At 45, he was considered one of the most successful private bankers in the country, managing portfolios for celebrities, tech moguls, and old money families who'd been rich since before the American Revolution. He wore a suit that probably cost more than Marcus's mom used to make in a year, back when she was alive, back when she worked 3 jobs and still couldn't pay rent on time. His shoes were so perfectly polished that Marcus could see the chandelier reflected in them. His silver hair was styled in a way that looked casual, but clearly wasn't. And his watch, Marcus had seen enough luxury watches in store windows to recognize a Patek Philippe, could have fed every kid in his building for a month. Richard Blackwell was everything Marcus wasn't. Powerful, respected, untouchable, safe. And he was staring directly at Marcus with an expression of amused disgust. "Janet," Richard called to the receptionist, his voice carrying across the lobby with the easy authority of someone who'd never been ignored in his life. "Is there a reason we're allowing street children into the building? I thought we had security for this sort of thing." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Around the lobby, other clients, all dressed in expensive suits and designer dresses, turned to stare. Marcus felt his face burning, shame and anger mixing together until his eyes stung with tears he refused to let fall. "Sir, the young man claims he has an account," Janet began, her voice uncertain. "An account?" Richard's laugh was sharp and cruel, designed to cut. "Look at him, Janet. He's got dirt on his face, and his clothes look like they came from a dumpster. The only account he's familiar with is probably the one his parents opened at the local liquor store." More laughter rippled through the lobby. A woman in a pearl necklace covered her mouth with a manicured hand, her eyes sparkling with mean delight. A man in a 3-piece suit shook his head, muttering something to his companion about the neighborhood going downhill. Marcus wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at him to turn around, push back through those revolving doors, and never come back. He'd been stupid to think he could belong here, even for 5 minutes. Stupid to think a card in an envelope could change anything about who he was, or where he came from. But then he thought about Mrs. Chen's apologetic face, about the eviction notice taped to his door, about his little sister Emma, who'd asked him that morning if they'd have dinner tonight, and the way his stomach had twisted when he'd had to tell her he didn't know. He thought about his mother. "I have a card," Marcus said again, louder this time. His voice shook, but he forced himself to step forward, to walk across that perfect marble floor toward Richard Blackwell's desk. "I just want to check my balance." Richard's expression shifted from amused to irritated. Clearly, he'd expected Marcus to run away crying. The fact that this dirty kid was actually approaching him seemed to offend him on a personal level. "Security!" Richard called out, but held up a hand when 2 uniformed guards started moving toward them. A new expression crossed his face, one Marcus couldn't quite read. It looked almost like curiosity, but darker, more predatory, like a cat that had found a mouse and decided to play with it before the kill. "Actually, wait," Richard said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "This could be entertaining." He leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers in front of him like a judge preparing to pass sentence. "Come here, boy. Let's see this account of yours." Marcus walked forward on legs that felt like they might give out at any moment. He could feel every eye in the lobby watching him, judging him, finding him lacking. His 2 big sneakers seemed impossibly loud against the marble. The envelope in his hand felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. When he reached Richard's desk, he had to look up to meet the banker's eyes. Richard was still smiling, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who was about to enjoy themselves at someone else's expense. "Let me guess," Richard said loudly, enough for everyone in the lobby to hear. "You found this card in the trash? Or maybe you stole it from someone's mailbox. That's a federal crime, you know. I could have you arrested right now." "I didn't steal it," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It came to my apartment. My name is on it." "Your name is on it?" Richard repeated mockingly. "And what might that name be? Should I be expecting a trust fund baby hiding under all that dirt?" "Marcus," he said, lifting his chin slightly. "Marcus Chen." Richard's fingers flew across his keyboard, his expression one of exaggerated patience, like a parent humoring a child's ridiculous story. "Marcus Chen," he repeated. "Well, let's see what we find, shall we? I'm sure this will be fascinating." The typing seemed to go on forever. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. Around the lobby, people had stopped even pretending to mind their own business. They were all watching, waiting to see this poor kid get exposed as a thief, or a liar, or whatever Richard Blackwell decided he was. Marcus's hand went to his pocket, touching the only other thing he always carried, a small, worn photograph of his mother. She was smiling in the picture, back before she got sick, back when she still believed that working 3 jobs might somehow be enough to build a better life for her kids. She'd been wrong about that. But maybe, just maybe, she'd been right about something else. Richard's fingers stopped typing. His eyes locked onto his screen. And for just a fraction of a second, Marcus saw his confident expression flicker. It was barely noticeable. Just a slight widening of the eyes, a tiny tightening around the mouth. But it was there. Then the professional mask slammed back into place, and Richard's smile grew even wider. "Well, well," Richard said, his voice dripping with false sweetness. "It appears you do have an account, Marcus Chen. How about that?" He paused dramatically, milking the moment for all it was worth. "Ladies and gentlemen, it seems we have a genuine client among us. The account shows a balance of—" He stopped mid-sentence, his eyes returning to the screen. This time, the flicker of surprise lasted longer. His smile froze on his face, taking on a slightly strained quality. "The balance shows—" Richard tried again, but his voice had lost some of its mocking certainty. Marcus watched as the banker's face went through a series of rapid changes: confusion, disbelief, shock, and something else, something that looked almost like fear. "That's impossible," Richard whispered so quietly that only Marcus could hear. "That's absolutely impossible." Richard Blackwell had seen many things in his 23 years of private banking. He'd watched tech entrepreneurs become billionaires overnight. He'd seen old fortunes crumble and new ones rise from the ashes. He'd witnessed the kind of wealth that most people couldn't even imagine, the kind that existed in a completely different reality from the world where normal people worried about rent and groceries. But he had never, not once in his entire career, seen anything like what was currently displayed on his screen. The number didn't make sense. It couldn't be real. It had to be a glitch in the system, some kind of error that would be corrected as soon as their IT department noticed it. Because there was absolutely no possible way that this dirty kid standing in front of him, this child who looked like he hadn't had a decent meal in weeks, could have that kind of money in an account. $47 million. $47 million sitting in an account under the name Marcus Chen, with no withdrawals, no activity of any kind since it had been opened 6 months ago. "There seems to be a technical issue," Richard said carefully, his professional mask firmly in place despite the chaos screaming through his mind. "The system is showing, well, it's clearly displaying incorrect information." "What does it say?" Marcus asked, his voice small and uncertain. Richard looked at the boy, really looked at him for the first time. The dirt on his face wasn't just smudge marks from playing outside. It was the kind of dirt that accumulated when you didn't have reliable access to clean water. His clothes weren't just old or unfashionable. They were literally falling apart, held together with visible repairs that spoke of desperation and resourcefulness. The duct tape on his shoes wasn't a fashion statement or even a temporary fix. It was a permanent solution to a problem that couldn't be solved any other way. This was a child living in real poverty. The kind of poverty that Richard had spent his entire life insulated from. The kind he'd maybe seen in documentaries, but never had to personally confront. And according to the screen in front of him, this child had $47 million. "Janet," Richard called out, trying to keep his voice steady. "Can you come here for a moment, please?" The receptionist hurried over, her heels clicking against the marble. "Yes, Mr. Blackwell?" "I need you to verify something on your terminal. Look up the account for Marcus Chen." He spelled out the account number, watching her face carefully. Janet's fingers moved across her keyboard with practiced efficiency. Richard saw the exact moment when she found the account. Her eyes went wide, and all the color drained from her face. "Sir," she whispered, leaning close so only he could hear. "The balance shows—" "I know what it shows," Richard cut her off. "The question is whether you're seeing the same thing I'm seeing or if this is isolated to my terminal." "It's the same," Janet confirmed, her voice shaking slightly. $47.3 million. Last deposit was 6 months ago. No withdrawals, no activity of any kind since the account was opened. Richard's mind was racing. This had to be some kind of money laundering operation. Or maybe the account belonged to the kid's parents and they were criminals who'd set up the account in their son's name to hide assets. That had to be it. There was no other logical explanation. "Marcus," Richard said, his tone shifting to something more serious, more investigative. "I need you to be very honest with me. Where did you get this card?" "It came in the mail," Marcus said. 6 months ago. There was a letter with it." "A letter from whom?" "From my mom." Marcus's voice cracked slightly on the last word. "Before she died." The lobby, which had been buzzing with curious whispers, fell suddenly silent. Richard felt something uncomfortable twist in his chest. Something that might have been shame, though he quickly pushed it away. "I see," Richard said carefully. "And your mother was—" "A cleaning lady," Marcus said, lifting his chin slightly in defiance of the shame that Richard was clearly expecting him to feel. "She worked 3 jobs, sometimes 4. She cleaned offices at night, worked at a laundromat during the day, and did whatever else she could find." That made even less sense. A cleaning lady with $47 million. Unless— "Marcus, is it possible your mother was involved in something illegal?" Richard asked, trying to sound diplomatic rather than accusatory. "Sometimes people in difficult financial situations make choices that—" "My mom wasn't a criminal," Marcus said sharply, with more force than he'd shown since entering the building. "She was the best person I ever knew. She worked herself to death, trying to give me and my sister a better life." Richard noticed the other clients in the lobby shifting uncomfortably. The woman with the pearl necklace who'd been laughing earlier was now staring at her shoes. The man in the 3-piece suit had turned away, suddenly very interested in his phone. "Of course," Richard said smoothly. "I didn't mean to suggest. Look, why don't we move this conversation to somewhere more private? Janet, can you escort Mr. Chen to conference room B?" "Actually," a new voice cut in, firm and authoritative, "I'll take it from here." Richard looked up to see James Morrison, one of the bank's senior account managers, striding across the lobby. James was 63, had been with the bank for over 30 years, and had a reputation for being both extremely competent and completely unimpressed by Richard's usual theatrics. "James, I'm handling this," Richard said, trying to inject authority into his voice. "No, Richard, you're making a scene," James replied calmly, "and you're about to make a very serious mistake." He turned to Marcus with an expression that was actually kind, the first kind expression the boy had seen since entering the building. "Hello, Marcus. My name is James Morrison. Would you mind coming with me? We can sort all of this out in a more comfortable setting." Marcus looked between the two men, clearly unsure who to trust. Finally, he nodded. As James led Marcus toward the elevators, Richard felt his control of the situation slipping away. He stood up quickly. "James, I really think I should be present for—" "You've done enough," James said without looking back. "Stay here and attend to your other clients. I'll handle this." Richard watched helplessly as James and Marcus disappeared into the elevator. Around him, the lobby was still silent. Everyone had witnessed his humiliation of a 12-year-old boy. A 12-year-old boy who apparently had more money than most of Richard's regular clients. He sat back down at his desk, trying to regain his composure, but he could feel the stares, could sense the judgment. For the first time in years, Richard Blackwell felt something he thought he'd left behind in his childhood: shame. Upstairs, in a comfortable conference room with soft lighting and furniture that actually looked inviting, James Morrison was making Marcus feel something he hadn't felt since entering the bank: safe. "First things first," James said, pouring Marcus a glass of water from a pitcher on the table. "Are you hungry? I can have someone bring up some food." Marcus's stomach growled audibly, answering the question. He nodded, embarrassed. James picked up the phone and ordered sandwiches, fruit, and cookies. "Enough for 3 people, he specified, even though there were only 2 of them in the room. When he hung up, he settled into the chair across from Marcus with a gentle smile. "Better?" he asked. "Why are you being nice to me?" Marcus asked suspiciously. "Everyone else here looks at me like I'm trash." "Because unlike Richard Blackwell, I actually remember what it's like to have nothing," James said simply. "I grew up in the Bronx in the 60s. My father was a bus driver. My mother cleaned houses. I was the first person in my family to go to college, and I only managed that because of scholarships and working 3 jobs. Marcus studied James's face, looking for signs of deception, but the older man's eyes were sincere. "Now," James said, pulling out a tablet, "let's talk about your account. I've pulled up the file, and I have to say it's quite remarkable. The account was opened 6 months ago by your mother, correct?" "I think so," Marcus said. "She never told me about it. I just got the card and a letter in the mail after she—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "May I see the letter?" James asked gently. Marcus pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. It had been read and reread so many times that the creases were beginning to tear. He handed it to James with trembling fingers. James unfolded the letter carefully and began to read. As his eyes moved across the page, his expression shifted from professional curiosity to deep emotion. When he finished, he had to clear his throat several times before speaking. "Marcus," he said softly, "your mother was an extraordinary woman." "Can you tell me what the money is?" Marcus asked. "I don't understand where it came from. We never had money. We could barely pay rent. Mom worked all the time, but we were always broke." James looked at the account details on his tablet, then back at the letter, then at Marcus. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "6 months ago, your mother came to this bank. She didn't come to the main entrance. She used the service entrance because she was here working as part of a cleaning crew. But she managed to get an appointment with one of our newer account managers, someone who was willing to listen to her story." "What story?" Marcus leaned forward. Your mother had been saving money for years. Every single extra dollar she made went into a shoebox under her bed. She told our account manager that she knew she was sick, that the doctors had told her she didn't have much time, and she wanted to make sure you and your sister would be taken care of. Marcus felt tears starting to form in his eyes. But we were so poor. How could she have saved that much? She didn't, James said gently. The money in your account isn't from savings, Marcus. It's from a life insurance policy. Life insurance? Marcus's voice was barely a whisper. James nodded. Your mother had been paying into a life insurance policy for over 10 years. Small payments, probably $20 or $30 a month, that she somehow found the money for even when you didn't have enough for food. The policy had a value of $50 million. The number was so large that Marcus couldn't even process it. $50 million. It wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But there's more, James continued. Your mother was very specific about how she wanted the money managed. She set up a trust with very particular conditions. The money is yours, but it's protected. You can't access the full amount until you're 25 years old. Until then, you have access to a monthly allowance that's more than enough to cover all your expenses: housing, food, education, everything you need. Marcus stared at James, unable to speak. His mother, who'd worked herself to death, who'd worn the same 3 outfits for 5 years, who'd sometimes gone without eating so he and Emma could have dinner. She had somehow managed to leave them millions of dollars. Why didn't she tell me? Marcus finally managed to ask. According to her letter, James said, touching the worn paper gently, she didn't want you to know she was dying. She didn't want your last memories of her to be filled with grief and fear. She wanted you to remember her as strong, as capable of taking care of you even after she was gone. A knock at the door interrupted them. A young woman entered with a tray of food, set it down on the table, gave Marcus a kind smile, and left. Eat, James encouraged. We have more to discuss, but you need food first. Marcus grabbed a sandwich and ate like he hadn't seen food in days, which wasn't far from the truth. As he ate, James explained more about the account, about the trust, about how Marcus would need a legal guardian to help manage things until he was older. What about my sister? Marcus asked between bites. Emma, she's only 8. Can this help her too? The trust covers both of you, James assured him. Your mother made sure of that. Emma is included in all the provisions. Marcus finished 2 sandwiches and was starting on a third when James's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and frowned. It seems Richard has been making calls, James said. He's very concerned about the legitimacy of your account. He's suggesting we need to involve federal authorities. Claims this might be money laundering or fraud. Marcus felt panic rising in his chest. But it's not. My mom... I know, James said firmly. And I have all the documentation to prove it. The insurance company, the trust documents, everything is completely legitimate and legal. Richard is Richard is having a difficult time accepting that he was wrong. He hates me, Marcus said quietly. He doesn't hate you, James corrected. He hates being made to look foolish. There's a difference. Richard Blackwell has built his entire career on being the smartest person in the room, on being able to read people and situations instantly. You challenged that. You walked into his bank looking like someone he could dismiss, someone he could mock for the entertainment of his wealthy clients, and you turned out to be one of the richest clients in the building. I'm not rich, Marcus protested. I'm just me. You're a 12-year-old boy with a $47 million trust fund, James said with a gentle smile. That makes you very rich, whether you feel like it or not. Marcus looked down at his dirty clothes, his duct-taped shoes, his hands that were still grimy, no matter how much he'd tried to clean them. I don't feel rich. Give it time, James said. Now let's talk about what happens next. Before we continue, take a second and share your thoughts so far on this story below. I read every single one. What would you have done if you were in Marcus's shoes, walking into that bank knowing you might be humiliated? Richard Blackwell was not accustomed to being wrong. In his carefully constructed world, he was always 3 steps ahead, always in control, always the one who determined how situations would unfold. But as he sat at his desk in the lobby, watching curious clients pretend they weren't staring at him, he felt something he hadn't experienced in decades: genuine uncertainty. His phone buzzed with a text from James. "Conference room B. Now. And Richard, check your ego at the door." Richard's jaw tightened. James Morrison had always been a thorn in his side, a reminder that success in banking didn't require the ruthless edge that Richard had cultivated so carefully. James succeeded through kindness, through genuine relationships with clients, through actually caring about the people whose money he managed. It was an approach Richard had always considered weak, inefficient, outdated. But James had also never made a mistake like the one Richard had just made. The elevator ride to the 14th floor felt longer than usual. Richard checked his reflection in the polished steel doors, straightening his tie, smoothing his hair, the armor of perfection that had always protected him. Except today, that armor had cracked, and he wasn't sure how to repair it. When he entered Conference Room B, the scene that greeted him was so unexpected that he actually stopped in the doorway. Marcus was sitting at the table, eating a sandwich with the kind of desperate hunger that spoke of too many missed meals. His face was cleaner now. Someone had given him wet wipes, apparently. And in the better light of the conference room, Richard could see details he'd missed before. The boy had his mother's eyes clearly. Large, dark, expressive eyes that held too much sadness for someone so young. His hands, though small, showed calluses that suggested he'd been working, taking on adult responsibilities far too early. James was sitting across from Marcus, and spread between them on the table were documents. Lots of documents. "Richard," James said, his tone neutral but firm, "thank you for joining us. Please sit down." Richard took a seat, feeling oddly like he was the one being evaluated rather than the other way around. Marcus glanced at him, then quickly looked away, focusing intently on his sandwich. "I've reviewed all the documentation regarding Marcus's account," James began, sliding a folder across the table to Richard. "Everything is completely legitimate. The money comes from a life insurance policy that his mother, Linda Chen, had been paying into for over 10 years. The policy paid out 6 months ago upon her death. All proper taxes have been paid. All legal requirements have been met. This is not fraud, money laundering, or any other illegal activity." Richard opened the folder and began reading. With each page, he felt his certainty crumbling further. This wasn't some criminal enterprise. This was a mother who'd loved her children so much that she'd sacrificed everything, literally everything, to ensure they'd be taken care of after she was gone. Linda Chen worked as a cleaning woman for several office buildings in Manhattan, James continued, including this one, actually. She probably cleaned this very room dozens of times. Richard felt something cold settle in his stomach. He thought about all the nights he'd worked late, leaving messes for the cleaning crew to handle, coffee cups left on desks, papers scattered carelessly. Had Marcus's mother been one of the invisible people who'd cleaned up after him? Had he ever even noticed her? "She worked 60 to 70 hours a week across 3 jobs," James went on. "Sometimes more. Every spare dollar went either to her children or to this insurance policy. According to the insurance company's records, she never missed a single payment, not once in 10 years. Even when—" James paused, checking his notes. Even when she was hospitalized for 3 days with pneumonia 4 years ago, she made her payment on time. Marcus had stopped eating. His hands were clenched in his lap, and Richard could see tears streaming silently down his face. The policy she chose was specifically designed to grow in value over time, James explained. It started small, but with compound interest and her consistent payments, it grew substantially. She structured everything through a trust to protect the children. Marcus and his sister Emma can't access the full amount until Marcus turns 25, but they have access to a monthly allowance that will more than cover all their needs: housing, food, education, medical care, everything. Richard looked at the numbers. The monthly allowance was $15,000, more than enough for 2 children to live comfortably, to go to good schools, to have opportunities, but not so much that it could be wasted or mismanaged quickly. She thought of everything, James said softly, down to the smallest detail. She even included provisions for Emma's education specifically. College tuition is prepaid through a separate fund, and there are annual increases built into the allowance to account for inflation and changing needs as the children grow older. How did she know how to set all this up? Richard heard himself ask. This is sophisticated estate planning. Most wealthy clients don't structure their trusts this well. She researched, Marcus said quietly. It was the first time he'd spoken since Richard entered the room. I remember her staying up late at the library. She said she was taking online courses to improve her English, but his voice broke. She was planning this. She was planning how to take care of us when she wasn't here anymore. Richard looked at this child, this boy he'd mocked and humiliated in front of a lobby full of people, and felt something he'd successfully avoided feeling for most of his adult life: genuine shame. The letter she left for Marcus explains everything, James said, picking up the worn piece of paper. Would you like me to read it, or? Marcus nodded, wiping his eyes. He should know. Everyone should know what kind of person my mom was. James cleared his throat and began to read. My dearest Marcus, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and I'm so sorry I couldn't stay longer. I'm sorry for every birthday I'll miss, every graduation I won't see, every moment of your life I won't get to share. But I need you to know something important. I'm not sorry for the life I lived. People will look at what I did, working multiple jobs, being tired all the time, not being able to afford nice things, and they'll think I failed. They'll think I should have done something different, been someone different. But Marcus, I was exactly who needed to be. I was your mother and Emma's mother, and that was the most important job I ever had. This money isn't an apology for not being rich when I was alive. It's a promise that you and Emma will have chances I never had, that you'll be able to choose what you want to be instead of just taking whatever work you can find, that you'll be able to dream without worrying about how to pay rent. But Marcus, and this is the most important part, money doesn't make you better than anyone else. It doesn't make you smarter or kinder or more deserving of respect. The world will treat you differently now, and you need to remember that the people who treat you well because you're rich are the same people who would have treated you badly if you were poor. Be kind to people who work hard jobs. Remember that I was one of those people. Remember that every cleaning person, every cashier, every worker you meet is someone's mother or father or child. They all have dreams. They all have worth. Money is just money. It's what you do with it that matters. Take care of your sister. Study hard. Build a good life. And most important, be happy. That's all I ever wanted for you. To be happy. I love you more than all the stars in the sky. More than all the words in all the books ever written. Forever your mother, Linda Chen. The silence that followed was profound. James carefully refolded the letter and handed it back to Marcus, who clutched it like it was the most precious thing in the world, which Richard realized it was. "I'm sorry," Richard heard himself say. The words felt foreign in his mouth, unpracticed. "Marcus, I'm genuinely sorry for how I treated you downstairs." Marcus looked at him with those two old eyes. "Are you sorry because you were wrong about the money? Or are you sorry because you were mean to a kid who didn't deserve it?" The question cut straight to the heart of the matter. Richard wanted to say he was sorry for the right reasons, but the honest answer was more complicated. He was sorry because he'd been exposed as wrong in front of his clients. He was sorry because this would damage his reputation. He was sorry because it was uncomfortable to confront his own cruelty. But looking at Marcus now, really seeing him for the first time, Richard felt something else stirring. A small voice that remembered being young, remembered his own mother who'd worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table before his father's business finally took off. A voice he'd been ignoring for so long that he'd almost forgotten it existed. "Both," Richard admitted. "I'm sorry for both reasons, and I know that's not good enough, but it's the truth." Marcus studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. It wasn't forgiveness. Richard didn't expect forgiveness, but it was acknowledgement. "So what happens now?" Marcus asked, looking between the two men. "Now," James said, "we set you up properly. You'll need a legal guardian until you're 18. Do you have any family?" Marcus shook his head. "Just Emma. Our mom was an only child, and our dad—" He trailed off. "We don't have anyone." "Then we'll work with social services to ensure you and Emma have proper care," James said. "But the trust provides funding for guardian compensation, so we should be able to find someone good. Someone your mother would have approved of. We'll also need to move you out of your current housing situation immediately." "I can help with that," Richard found himself saying. Both Marcus and James looked at him in surprise. "What?" Richard said defensively. "The boy is one of our most valuable clients. We have a responsibility to ensure his well-being." It wasn't entirely altruistic. Richard was already thinking about how this story could be spun, how a redemption arc might actually benefit his reputation. But it wasn't entirely selfish either. For the first time in a very long time, Richard Blackwell was considering someone else's needs before his own. "There's a residential building 2 blocks from here," Richard continued. "Luxury apartments, full security, excellent schools nearby. The bank owns several units. I can have one prepared for Marcus and his sister within 48 hours. "That's actually very generous," James said, clearly suspicious of Richard's motives, but unable to deny that it was a good solution. Marcus looked overwhelmed. "I can't. That's too much. I just needed to check my balance so I could buy groceries." "Marcus," Richard said, and for once his voice held no condescension, no mockery, just simple honesty. "Your life just changed completely. The money your mother left you means you never have to worry about groceries again. You never have to worry about rent or utilities or any of the things that kept you up at night. Your mother made sure of that." "But I don't know how to be rich," Marcus whispered. "I don't know how to live like that." "Then you'll learn," James said gently. "One day at a time. And we'll help you." The afternoon sun was setting over the Bronx when Marcus and Richard arrived at the building Marcus had called home for the past 3 years. Richard's luxury sedan looked absurdly out of place on this street, like a spaceship that had accidentally landed in the wrong dimension. Richard had insisted on accompanying Marcus to collect his sister and their belongings. James had suggested sending a professional moving service, but Richard had surprised both of them by volunteering to go personally. "The boy shouldn't have to face this alone," he'd said, though he suspected his real motivation was more complicated than simple kindness. Now, Sitting in his car and looking at the building, Richard felt his carefully constructed worldview continuing to crumble. The building was 5 stories of crumbling brick and broken windows. Fire escapes hung precariously from the facade, rust eating through the metal supports. Trash bags were piled on, the sidewalk torn open by rats or stray dogs. Graffiti covered every available surface, some of it artistic, most of it just angry scrawls marking territory. "This is where you live?" Richard asked, then immediately regretted the question. Of course, this was where Marcus lived. Where else would a child whose mother worked 3 jobs be able to afford? "4th floor," Marcus said quietly. "The elevator hasn't worked in 2 years, so we have to take the stairs." They got out of the car and Richard locked it 3 times, checking each door handle. A group of teenagers sitting on the front steps watched them with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Richard felt acutely aware of his expensive suit, his Rolex, the leather briefcase he was carrying. He might as well have painted a target on his back. But then Marcus nodded to the teenagers. "Hey, Carlos, Miguel." "Marcus." One of the boys jumped up, concern evident on his face. "Man, where you been? Emma's been crying all day. Mrs. Rodriguez has been watching her, but she keeps asking for you." "I'm sorry," Marcus said. "I had to take care of something important. I'm here now." The teenager's eyes shifted to Richard, taking in the expensive suit with obvious distrust. "Who's this?" "Someone who's helping me," Marcus said simply. "It's okay, Carlos, I promise." The interior of the building was worse than the exterior. The hallway was dark, half the light fixtures were broken, and smelled of mildew, cooking grease, and something else Richard couldn't identify, but that made his stomach turn. The walls were water-stained. The floor tiles were cracked and missing in places. They climbed the stairs, passing other residents. An elderly woman carrying groceries, who Marcus helped even though Richard could see the boy was exhausted. A young mother with a baby on her hip and 2 toddlers clinging to her legs, who smiled wearily at Marcus. A man in a security guard uniform heading out for the night shift. Each time Marcus greeted them by name. Each time they asked about Emma, about how he was managing, and each time Richard felt smaller and smaller. These people had nothing. They lived in conditions that Richard wouldn't have tolerated for a storage unit. But they cared about each other in a way that Richard's wealthy clients never did. They were a community, looking out for one another because they understood that survival required solidarity. When they reached the 4th floor, Marcus stopped in front of a door with peeling paint. The number 4C hung crooked, held by a single screw. He pulled out a key, then paused. "It's not much," Marcus said, not looking at Richard. "I know what you're thinking, but it was home." "I'm not thinking anything," Richard lied. In truth, his mind was racing with thoughts, none of them flattering to himself. Marcus opened the door. The apartment was tiny, maybe 400 square feet total. There was a main room that served as living room, dining, room, and kitchen all at once. 2 doors led off to what Richard assumed were bedrooms, though he suspected they were barely larger than closets. The furniture was old and worn, held together with determination and duct tape. But the apartment was clean, meticulously clean, and decorated with obvious love. Children's drawings covered the walls. A small bookshelf held well-worn paperbacks arranged by color. A vase of plastic flowers sat on a table positioned to catch the afternoon light from the single window. "Marcus!" A little girl burst out of one of the bedrooms and threw herself at Marcus. She was 8 years old, small for her age, with the same dark eyes as her brother. Her clothes were clean but patched. Her hair was pulled back into braids that were starting to come loose. "Emma," Marcus said, hugging her tight. "I'm sorry I was gone so long. I'm so sorry." "Mrs. Rodriguez said you want to take care of grown-up stuff," Emma said, her voice muffled against Marcus's shoulder. "I was scared you weren't coming back." "I'll always come back," Marcus promised. Always. But Emma, I have something important to tell you. Something about Mom. An older woman emerged from the other bedroom. Mrs. Rodriguez, Richard assumed. She was in her 60s with kind eyes and worn hands that spoke of a lifetime of hard work. Marcus, she said with obvious relief. Thank God. Emma's been so worried. Her eyes moved to Richard, instantly suspicious. Who's your friend? This is Mr. Blackwell, Marcus said. He's from the bank. Mom left us some money, Mrs. Rodriguez. A lot of money. Mrs. Rodriguez's expression shifted through several emotions in rapid succession. Surprise, disbelief, hope, and then something that looked like grief. Linda, she whispered. That woman. She was always planning, always thinking ahead. She wiped her eyes quickly. How much money, mijo? Marcus looked at Richard helplessly. Even after spending hours discussing it, he still couldn't quite wrap his mind around the number. Enough that they'll never have to worry again, Richard said gently. Enough for excellent schools, a safe home, everything they need. Mrs. Rodriguez pressed her hands to her mouth, tears flowing freely now. Linda, you beautiful, crazy woman. You actually did it. Did what? Emma asked, looking confused. Marcus knelt down to his sister's level. Emma, remember how Mom always said she was going to make sure we were okay? That we'd always have what we needed? Emma nodded solemnly. She did it, Marcus said, his own tears starting. She left us enough money that we can have a nice apartment, and you can go to a good school, and we can have food whenever we're hungry. And his voice broke. She took care of us, Emma. Even after she was gone, she's still taking care of us. Emma was quiet for a moment, processing this. Then she asked the question that broke Richard's heart. Does this mean we don't have to be hungry anymore? Richard turned away, unable to watch, unable to bear the weight of that simple question. These children, these babies, had been living with hunger as a constant companion. While he'd been spending hundreds of dollars on business lunches he barely touched, these kids had been wondering if they'd eat dinner. No, baby, Marcus said, pulling Emma close again. We never have to be hungry again. Mrs. Rodriguez was openly sobbing now. Your mother, she used to come home at 3 a.m, and she'd still find energy to braid Emma's hair for school. She'd work doubles at the laundromat on weekends and never complained, not once. We all knew she was sick, but she kept working, kept smiling, kept telling us she was fine. She wasn't fine, Marcus said quietly. She was dying, and she knew it. But she didn't want us to know, because she didn't want us to be scared. Richard finally turned back to face the room. She was protecting you, he said. Right to the very end. She was protecting you. Emma looked up at Richard for the first time, studying him with the directness that only children possess. Are you going to help my brother? Yes, Richard said, and meant it more than he'd meant anything in a long time. I'm going to help both of you. Okay, Emma said simply, with the easy trust of a child who'd been taught that most adults were good people trying their best. Can we bring Bunny? She held up a stuffed rabbit that had clearly seen better days. One ear was hanging by a thread. The fur was matted and thin, and Richard suspected it had been repaired dozens of times. We can bring everything you want, Marcus assured her. They spent the next hour packing. There wasn't much to pack. A few changes of clothes each, some books, Emma's stuffed animals, Marcus's school papers and photographs of their mother. Everything they owned fit into 4 garbage bags and 1 small suitcase. Richard watched as Marcus carefully took down the drawings from the walls. As Emma collected her crayons and the notebook where she practiced writing her name, he watched as they said goodbye to Mrs. Rodriguez, who made them promise to call her, to visit, to never forget where they came from. You're good kids, Mrs. Rodriguez told them, hugging them both fiercely. Your mama raised you right. Don't let money change that." "We won't," Marcus promised. As they carried the bags down the stairs, Richard insisted on taking the heaviest ones, despite Marcus's protests. Other residents came out to say goodbye, word having spread quickly about the children's good fortune. There was no jealousy in their faces, only genuine happiness. These people understood what it meant to struggle, and they were celebrating this rare victory. Carlos and his friends helped carry bags to the car. An elderly man gave Marcus $20 for emergencies, refusing to take it back, even when Marcus tried to explain that he didn't need it anymore. A young woman gave Emma a chocolate bar for the road. This, Richard realized, was what community looked like, what caring for your neighbors actually meant. Not charity galas where wealthy people wrote checks to feel better about themselves, but real human connection. People taking care of each other because it was the right thing to do. When they were finally in the car, bags loaded, Richard started the engine, but didn't immediately drive away. He looked at Marcus and Emma in the rearview mirror. These two children who'd lost everything but still had their dignity, their kindness, their fundamental decency. "Thank you," Marcus said quietly, "for coming with me, for not making me do this alone." Richard gripped the steering wheel tightly. "Marcus, I need to say something, and I need you to really hear it." Both children looked at him attentively. "What I did to you this morning at the bank, humiliating you, mocking you, treating you like you were nothing, was unforgivable. I've spent my entire career judging people based on their clothes, their addresses, their bank accounts. I've convinced myself that money equals worth, that success equals superiority." He turned to look at them directly. "But your mother, who cleaned toilets for a living, who worked herself to death, who never had expensive clothes or fancy cars, she was worth more than 1,000 men like me. She understood something I'd forgotten, that the measure of a person isn't what they have, it's what they give." "Mom always said that being kind doesn't cost anything," Emma offered shyly. "Your mother was a wise woman," Richard said. "And I'm going to try, really try, to be better. To be the kind of person who would have seen your mother's worth, who would have seen your worth, regardless of the numbers in your bank account." Marcus nodded slowly. That's all she would have wanted, for people to try to be better. Richard put the car in gear and pulled away from the curb. In the rearview mirror, he could see the residents of the building waving goodbye. See Mrs. Rodriguez wiping her eyes on her apron. As they drove toward Manhattan, toward the luxury apartment that would be Marcus and Emma's new home, Richard made himself a promise. He would help these children, yes. But more than that, he would let them help him remember what really mattered, help him become the kind of person who saw value in everyone, not just those who could afford his services. It was, he realized, the most important education he'd ever receive. And his teachers were 12 and 8 years old. 3 months had passed since that Friday morning when Marcus Chen had walked into Blackwell and Associates private banking with dirt on his face and fear in his heart. 3 months since Richard Blackwell's carefully constructed world had been shattered by a 12-year-old boy, and a letter from a mother who'd loved her children more than life itself. The luxury apartment on Park Avenue had been transformed into something that actually felt like home. Emma's drawings now covered one entire wall. Richard had insisted on having them professionally framed, though Marcus had argued they were just crayon sketches. The furniture was still expensive, but Marcus had chosen pieces that were comfortable rather than impressive. Stuffed animals shared space with new books. The kitchen, which had seemed impossibly large at first, was now regularly filled with the smell of Emma learning to bake cookies with their new guardian, Mrs. Patterson. Mrs. Patterson was a retired schoolteacher in her late 50s who'd lost her own daughter to cancer 10 years earlier. When the social worker had introduced her to Marcus and Emma, she'd looked at them with the same fierce protectiveness that Linda Chen had once shown. Within a week, she'd moved into the apartment's guest room and had seamlessly become the steady, loving presence the children desperately needed. But the most dramatic transformation hadn't happened in the apartment. It had happened in Richard Blackwell. The morning after taking Marcus and Emma to their new home, Richard had arrived at the bank at 5 a.m, 2 hours earlier than usual. He had walked through every floor of the building, really looking at it for the first time in years. He'd noticed the cleaning crew working silently, emptying trash cans and vacuuming carpets while the rest of the world slept. He'd watched them move through the offices like ghosts, invisible and unacknowledged. At 6 a.m, he'd done something he'd never done before. He'd introduced himself to the cleaning crew supervisor. "Good morning," he'd said to a startled woman named Gloria. "I'm Richard Blackwell. I own this bank, and I'd like to know your name and the names of everyone on your team." Gloria had stared at him like he was speaking a foreign language. In 20 years of cleaning this building, no executive had ever spoken to her directly, certainly not the CEO. But Richard had been patient. He'd learned every name, asked about their families, their lives, their challenges. And when Gloria had finally opened up, telling him about the impossible expectations, the poverty wages, the lack of benefits or respect, Richard had listened with the kind of attention he usually reserved for billionaire clients. By Monday morning, he'd called an emergency board meeting. "Gentlemen," he'd said to the assembled board members, "I'm proposing some changes to how we operate this institution." What followed was the most contentious board meeting in the bank's 100-year history. Richard proposed tripling the wages of the cleaning and maintenance staff. He proposed providing health insurance, paid vacation, and retirement benefits. He proposed creating a scholarship fund for the children of service workers who wanted to pursue higher education. "Have you lost your mind?" one board member had shouted. "These costs will significantly impact our profit margins." "Good," Richard had replied calmly. "Our profit margins are obscene. We can afford to treat the people who make this building function like human beings rather than disposable resources." The vote had been close, but Richard had won. Barely. 2 board members had resigned in protest. Richard had thanked them for their service and hadn't bothered to hide his relief at their departure. Then he'd started making changes to how the bank treated all its employees, not just the service workers. Exit interviews revealed a pattern of discrimination, favoritism, and fear-based management. Richard had fired 3 senior managers who'd been creating toxic environments. He'd implemented transparent promotion criteria. He'd started actually listening to employees rather than just issuing orders. The financial press had been brutal. "Blackwell goes soft," one headline read. "Banking executives' strange transformation worries investors," said another. Richard's peers at other banks called him privately, asking if he was having some kind of breakdown. He told them all the same thing. "I met someone who taught me what real wealth looks like, and it wasn't in a bank account." Now, sitting in his office on a crisp October afternoon, Richard was reviewing the quarterly reports when his assistant buzzed him. "Mr. Blackwell, Marcus and Emma Chen are here to see you." Richard smiled, something he found himself doing much more frequently these days. "Send them in." Marcus and Emma entered, and Richard still marveled at the transformation. Marcus wore clothes that actually fit. His face was clean and healthy-looking, and most importantly, the constant fear in his eyes had been replaced by something else. Not happiness exactly. The grief of losing his mother was still too fresh for that. But peace, security, hope. Emma was thriving. She'd started at a new school where she was getting A's in every subject. She'd made friends. She'd gained weight, healthy weight that came from regular meals and not wondering where the next one would come from. She was 8 years old and finally getting to actually be 8 years old. "Mr. Blackwell," Emma said, running to give him a hug. She'd lost her initial shyness around him within the first week. "I got 100% on my math test." "That's wonderful, Emma," Richard said, genuinely delighted. "Did you bring it to show me?" She pulled a paper from her backpack, beaming with pride. Richard made a show of examining it carefully, then reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a gold star sticker, something he'd started keeping specifically for Emma's visits. "This goes in your achievement book," he said solemnly, handing it to her. Emma carefully placed the sticker on her test, then sat down in one of the leather chairs, pulling out a book to read while the adults talked. Marcus took the other chair, his expression more serious. "I wanted to talk to you about something." "Of course. What's on your mind?" "I've been thinking a lot about what my mom wanted," Marcus began. "Not just for me and Emma, but bigger than that. She wrote in her letter that money is just money. It's what you do with it that matters." Richard nodded, waiting. "I want to start a foundation," Marcus said, "for kids like me and Emma. Kids whose parents are working themselves to death but still can't make ends meet. I want to help them." Richard felt his throat tighten. "That's a beautiful idea, Marcus. What kind of help are you thinking about?" "Everything," Marcus said, his voice gaining strength as he talked. School supplies, tutoring, food assistance, helping parents get better jobs. But also, and this is the important part, I want to help people see those kids, really see them, the way you didn't see me at first." The words stung, but Richard didn't flinch from them. "You're absolutely right. What did you have in mind?" Marcus pulled out a notebook. He'd clearly been planning this carefully. "I've been researching other foundations, talking to Mrs. Patterson about it. I want to call it the Linda Chen Foundation for Working Families, and I want to donate $10 million from my trust to start it." Richard blinked. "Marcus, that's a substantial amount of money." "I know," Marcus said, "but it's what Mom would have wanted. She didn't save all that money just so I could buy expensive stuff. She saved it so I could make a difference." "You understand? This is a long-term commitment?" Richard asked carefully. "Running a foundation is serious work. It requires oversight, administration, careful planning." "I know," Marcus said. "That's why I was hoping you would help. Not just with the money part, but with making sure it actually helps people. You understand how to make things work in the business world." Richard was quiet for a long moment. 3 months ago, he would have dismissed this as a child's naive fantasy. But he'd learned enough since then to recognize that Marcus understood something profound. Something Richard was still learning. "I would be honored to help," Richard said. "On one condition." Marcus looked wary. "What condition?" "That you let me donate $10 million of my own money to match yours." Marcus's eyes widened. "You'd do that?" "Marcus, 3 months ago I was a man who measured success by the size of my bank account and the fear in my employees' eyes. I was miserable, even though I couldn't admit it to myself. Your mother's letter, the way she loved you, and Emma, the way she sacrificed everything for you, it showed me what I'd been missing." Richard stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city. "I've spent the last 3 months trying to be better, treating people with dignity, actually caring about the employees who work for me. And you know what I've discovered?" "What?" Marcus asked. "I'm happier than I've been in 20 years, Richard said simply. "I sleep better. I actually enjoy coming to work. I've reconnected with my daughter. Did I tell you I have a daughter? She's 25, and for years she wouldn't speak to me because I'd been such a terrible father. But she called me last week. She said she'd heard about the changes I was making, and she wanted to meet for coffee." Marcus smiled. "Did you go?" "We had coffee for 3 hours," Richard said, his voice thick with emotion. 3 hours of actually talking, actually listening to each other. I told her about you and Emma, about your mother. I told her I was trying to learn how to be a better person. What did she say? She said it was about time. Richard laughed. But she also said she was proud of me. Do you know how long it's been since anyone said they were proud of me? Not impressed by my money or my success, but actually proud of me as a person? Emma looked up from her book. I'm proud of you, Mr. Blackwell. The simple statement, delivered with such sincere conviction, nearly undid Richard completely. He had to clear his throat several times before he could respond. Thank you, Emma. That means more than you know. James Morrison appeared in the doorway, knocking gently. Sorry to interrupt, but Richard, the Channel 7 news crew is here for the interview. Interview? Marcus asked. Richard had been planning to tell Marcus about this, but the Boys Foundation proposal had derailed his plans. I've been asked to do an interview about the changes we've made at the bank. I was going to ask if you'd be willing to participate, but you're under no obligation. What kind of interview? Marcus asked cautiously. They want to talk about how encountering you changed my perspective on leadership and human dignity, Richard explained. But I won't do it without your permission. Your story is your own. Marcus thought for a moment. Will it help other people? Other kids who are struggling? I believe it could, Richard said honestly. It might inspire other business leaders to examine how they treat their employees. It might help people understand that everyone deserves dignity and respect, regardless of their job or income. Then I'll do it, Marcus decided. But I want to talk about my mom, about who she really was. Before we go deeper, I would love to hear your point of view. Tell me what part hit you the hardest in this story, and share your thoughts in the comments. What would you do with that kind of money if you were in Marcus's position? The interview took place in the bank's conference room. The reporter, a woman named Sarah Chen, no relation to Marcus, though the coincidence made everyone pause, was professional but warm. She'd done her research and approached the story with genuine interest rather than looking for scandal. Mr. Blackwell, Sarah began, 3 months ago, you were known as one of the most ruthless executives in private banking. Your management style was described as cutthroat and intimidating. What changed? Richard looked at Marcus, who nodded encouragingly. I met a 12-year-old boy who showed me that I'd been measuring success with the wrong metrics, Richard said. Marcus walked into my bank looking for help, and I humiliated him in front of a room full of people because he didn't look wealthy. I judged him based on his appearance, his circumstances, his poverty. And then, Sarah prompted. And then I discovered he was one of the wealthiest clients in the building, Richard said. But more importantly, I learned about his mother. Linda Chen worked 3 jobs, cleaning offices and doing laundry. She wore the same few outfits for years. She sometimes went without eating so her children could have dinner. And while she was doing all of that, she was building a future for her kids that was more impressive than anything I'd ever accomplished. Marcus took over the story, talking about his mother with a mixture of pride and grief that was heartbreaking to witness. He talked about her sacrifices, her love, her final gift to her children. Emma chimed in occasionally with memories of their mother braiding her hair before school, of tucking them in at night no matter how exhausted she was. The money is wonderful, Marcus said. It means Emma and I don't have to worry about food or housing or education. But the real gift my mom gave us was showing us how to be good people, how to work hard, how to care about others, how to never treat anyone as less than human. Sarah turned to Richard. And that lesson inspired you to make significant changes to how you operate your business? It inspired me to become the kind of person I should have been all along, Richard corrected. We've tripled wages for service workers, implemented comprehensive benefits packages, created scholarship programs, and fundamentally changed our corporate culture from one based on fear to one based on respect. Your critics say you've gone soft, Sarah noted. That you're sacrificing profitability for political correctness. Richard smiled. Our profitability has actually increased. Turns out when you treat employees well, they work harder, stay longer, and care more about the company's success. Who knew? The sarcasm in his voice made Sarah laugh. But more than that, Richard continued, becoming serious again. I don't care what my critics say. I spent 45 years caring desperately about what other wealthy men thought of me, and it made me miserable. Now I care about whether I can look at myself in the mirror and feel proud of who I am. And for the first time in decades, I can. The interview went on for another hour, covering the details of the foundation Marcus wanted to start, the specific changes Richard had implemented, and the broader implications for corporate leadership. When it was finally over and the news crew had packed up their equipment, Marcus and Emma prepared to leave. Thank you for doing that, Marcus said to Richard, for being willing to talk about what happened. Thank you for giving me the chance to be better, Richard replied. You and Emma and your mother, you saved my life. I know that sounds dramatic, but it's true. I was living a life without meaning, without purpose, without real human connection. You gave all of that back to me. Emma hugged him again. You're a good person, Mr. Blackwell. I'm trying to be, Richard said. Every single day, I'm trying. After they left, Richard sat alone in his office as the sun set over Manhattan. He thought about Linda Chen, a woman he'd never met but who'd changed his life completely. He thought about how many other Linda Chens were out there, working invisible jobs, sacrificing everything for their children, never getting recognition or respect. He picked up his phone and called James Morrison. James, I want to expand our employee support programs. I want to create a child care center in the building. I want to offer educational assistance not just to employees but to their children. I want... Richard, James interrupted gently. Slow down. We can do all of those things, but we need to plan carefully. I know, Richard said, but I also know that every day we wait is another day that someone like Linda Chen is working themselves to exhaustion without support. I don't want to wait anymore. Then we won't, James said simply. We'll start planning tomorrow. Richard hung up and turned to his computer. He had emails to write. To his daughter, suggesting they have dinner this weekend. To his ex-wife, apologizing for decades of emotional absence. To the employees he'd mistreated over the years, offering genuine apologies and, where possible, restitution. He had a lot of work to do, a lot of years to make up for, a lot of damage to repair. But for the first time in his life, Richard Blackwell was doing work that actually mattered. And it had all started with a dirty kid asking to check his balance, and a millionaire who'd learned that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars, but in the lives you touched, the kindness you showed, and the dignity you extended to every human being. The screen had shown a number, $47 million, that had frozen Richard's smile. But it was what happened after, the lesson he learned from a boy and his sister and their mother's love that had thawed his heart, and that transformation was worth more than any amount of money could ever be. Thank you so much for watching this story. If Marcus's journey moved you the way it moved me, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to True Justice. We share stories like this one, stories about real people facing impossible odds and finding hope in unexpected places. Drop a comment below and tell me, what did you take away from Linda Chen's sacrifice? What would you do if you suddenly found yourself in Marcus's shoes? I read every single comment, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you know someone who needs to hear this story, someone who's working hard, struggling, feeling invisible, please share this video with them. Sometimes we all need to be reminded that our sacrifices matter, that kindness costs nothing, and that the measure of a person isn't what they have, but what they give. Until next time, take care of each other. And remember, true wealth isn't in your bank account. It's in the lives you touch.